This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Not Dynamite. That was... Well, here's what I'll say about that show. With the one notable exception that I think you can all figure out if you have two brain cells to rub together. The show was filled with the usual constant stupidity that we've all come to expect by now. However, this week was the first time in a long time where, as I was watching the show and the absurdity is just blistering through my screen full force, I'm not kidding you. This was the first episode of Dynamite I can recall where I laughed so hard at all the stupid crap. It actually brought me back to the dying days of Nitro, where it was just bad segment after bad segment after bad segment. And I couldn't even really get angry about any of it. I just spent the entire 2 hours just crying with laughter. Like normally with the show, I watch it, it happens, I'm pissed when it's over, and I immediately forget about everything that happened after the fact. This was one of those shows where there was so much stupidity throughout the entire program, I finally cracked. They've managed to get me to care so little about anything with this product at this point. I've now accepted that I am just here for the laughs. I used to hold out hope for this company. I really gave them the benefit of the doubt for well over 2 years when it came to actually making this a viable wrestling product worth taking seriously. But this week, man, this week they just got me. I could not stop laughing for the entire show. And trust me, if you ever got to know me or hang out with me for more than 5 minutes, you would come to realize how much it takes to actually get me to laugh under normal circumstances. I have mastered the art of stoicism to the point where people probably think I'm mentally deficient. But AEW finally cracked the code. They had me on the floor holding onto my rib cage. I was laughing so hard. And, I mean, we'll talk about it in detail later on because I got a thing or two to say about that show. Spoiler alert. The only good thing about it was CM Punk. Yeah, I know, right? And unfortunately, that all happened within the first 10 minutes of the show, and everything that happened after the fact was now the usual. Before we take that old dog and pony show out behind the barn and shoot it in the head, let me get a few things out of the way first. If this is your first time checking out the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, welcome aboard. We are here on Mondays and Fridays each week on YouTube and Rumble, giving you the most honest, transparent, and straightforward wrestling reports and reviews that you really would come to find in most spaces anymore. But we've also got variety here on the channel, so if you like both modern and classic content, well, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe, like the show, comment, and stop back every week to show your support for the channel. Make sure you have the bell icon turned on too to get notifications. The goal is to just come on here and talk to the people. Whether you're an old disgruntled man screaming at the clouds or the weird, bizarre young crew that likes all the modern garbage that you got going on today. You get a nice bit of spice and variety on the channel here. I do not spitball anything but cold, hard truths. Some of you may like it, some of you won't, and quite frankly, I don't care. We need more people in this world spitting factual information, especially in the world of pro wrestling where everyone's concept of the business is so diluted and morphed, no one even knows what the goddamn business is supposed to be anymore. It's a shame. Don't worry, I haven't lost sight of it. Not a bit. Been watching this stuff for well over 25 years now. I'm not an expert. I'm not a journalist. I don't purport to be anything other than a longtime wrestling fan that just likes coming on here and sharing my thoughts on the product. But I also have insight and experience watching wrestling where I know what works and what doesn't. And trust me, AEW gives me enough material every week to judge what doesn't work. So why don't we just start tearing into this thing, because I've got plenty to say about it. The program did start with, let's be honest, as it rightfully should have. Christ, if they'd have started with anything other than Punk, I'd probably have thrown my coffee mug at the TV monitor. He's their biggest star, their biggest attraction, and at this stage, one of the only few things that's actually keeping me watching this godforsaken product. At one point, I'd love to have thrown a Bryan Danielson or an MJF into that panel as well. Unfortunately, MJF is on an extended paid leave of absence, and I don't even know what to make of Danielson at this stage, but we'll get to that. And as soon as Punk comes out and grabs the microphone, I'm all ears. He's the only guy on this show right now that can captivate my attention before speaking a word. And the first part of this was absolutely tremendous. Honestly, I don't even know how to really describe it, other than Punk going into full troll mode. First, he says that he has a couple important things to address and some lesser important things. And on the lesser important side of things, he calls out Hangman Adam Page to challenge him to a world title rematch right here, right now. And he waits. And he waits. And he waits. Page doesn't answer. And then Punk goes, well, okay, that answers that. Now on to more important matter. Basically called him a coward and talked about how everyone likes to talk a big game until they finally become the number one guy. And then it turns out when they finally reach the top of the mountain, they can't handle the pressure, and they all turn into pussies, essentially. And I thought, wow, that was a total burial. And on second thought, realizing that it was Hangman Page he was talking about, I came to grips with the reality that, you know what? He is exactly right. And I know that'll piss off all the Adam Page fanatics out there, but there was one thing that Punk kept reverting back to in this promo while he was just firing off all these shots. He kept looking at the crowd and saying, "Tell me when I am lying." And he kept repeating this quote several times over. And I sat there and waited the entire time for Punk to say any untruthful thing about anyone he was taking shots at, and there was not a single lie he told in his entire banter. You may not like it, but I continue to maintain the opinion that Adam Page was a shitty world champion, his title reign fucking tanked, him as the top guy sucked, and he actually got less over as the champion than he was when they were propping him up to win the title in the first place. And look where Adam Page is now. I rest my case. And then he immediately segued into taking some well-deserved pot shots at the parking lot attendant. That's John Moxley, for those of you that don't get attempts at humor. Basically called him a second-rate bit player. Said everywhere he's gone, he's always been number two because there was always somebody better than him and more deserving of the top spot than him. Once again, addressing the fans, tell me when I'm lying. Not lying. Then Punk started name-dropping several insider deals, most of which went completely over my head, with the exception of his one comment where he said, "When I beat Moxley in Chicago at All Out, that will not be the best John I've ever beaten in Chicago. Again, not lying. And any of you that have ever heard my comments on Cena, you know I'm not a fan of him by any stretch. So this finally led to Moxley coming out, and Punk did not skip a beat here with the snide commentary. Of course, Mox comes out to the crowd like he always does, so Punk takes the time to crack jokes about it and start making snow angels in the ring, because he knew it was going to take Mox about 8 months to get down to the ring anyway, just making a total mockery of this fucking asshat, and I loved every bit of it. So eventually Mox gets in there and, well, he does the only thing he knows how to do. He paced around the ring like he was trying to hold in a wet fart. He bebopped his head around like D'Lo Brown. He said something about the only reason Punk coming to AEW was because he ran out of money. Where's my Scott Hall gif? And of course, after all of Mox's failed attempts at comebacks, Punk's big line to him was, well, I would fight you right here, right now, but I'm afraid if I touch you, you'll start bleeding all over me. This is where my uncontained laughter for the evening started seeping through. And by the way, that one line right there, there's no way that guy doesn't listen to Cornette's podcasts. So they finally got to the big pull-apart deal at the end, after they exchanged windmill punches for about 10 seconds, and that part sucked. I mostly blame Moxley for being a garbage wrestler and having no concept of how to make anything convincing, but I mean, honestly, if I were Punk in that situation, I'd have just started teeing off on this idiot as a shoot. I mean, it makes at least make the shit look real in some capacity. But, I mean, my conclusion of this segment was exactly what my hindbrain told me it would be before Mox even got involved. Everything Punk said and did in this segment was phenomenal, and everything Mox did was stagey, hokey, and goofy. Up to and including his shucking and head bopping and whatever that weird strut thing he does is. But here's where things got real interesting. And they actually had follow-up with this later on in the program, but since we're covering it in detail here. So they spent this entire segment amping people up to see these guys wrestle it all out in 3 weeks, only for them to randomly announce later on in the night, oh yeah, by the way, this match is happening next week. And I said, whoa, wait, back the truck up. What now? Yes, they announced for free next week on Dynamite, CM Punk versus Jon Moxley for the AEW World Championship. Because apparently Tony Khan determined that these two cannot hold off for 3 more weeks, so we must do this match on television and not make people pay to see it. Because, you know, why would we want to try and boost potential pay-per-view buys when we could just give away the match for free in Cleveland next week? Yeah, I don't know. Quite frankly, I'm actually not bothered by it like you might think I'd be. I mean, I already said I wasn't real big on this program to begin with, so who knows? Maybe they'll just blow it off for free next week. Punk wins, and they find someone else for Punk to wrestle it all out. I mean, I'd be more on board with that anyway. Just as long as they don't go back to the well with the fake cowboy and the butterfly jeans, but unfortunately, that might be the direction they're going. Following that was a Powerhouse Hobbs promo that I actually took the time to sit back and watch. Mostly because they actually let the fucking guy talk here. And I'll be damned, they actually had a backstage promo on the show for once that did not directly involve interruption or a brawl sequence. Tony Schiavone stood by Hobbs. He held the microphone the entire time, And Hobbs explained exactly why he turned on Ricky Starks in full detail. Didn't make a goddamn lick of sense from a story standpoint, but I'm just more so impressed that they actually let someone explain something for a change. So I didn't even care that the explanation didn't make any sense. And, whereas Wardlow was one of those guys where after hearing him talk once, I determined that I never needed to see him hold a microphone ever again. I actually forgot that Hobbs can actually talk. I mean, he definitely needs a little more bass in his delivery, but he's a fine promo. It's too bad we'll never get to see it more often than twice a year. Otherwise, I might care more. But this was surprisingly good. Then we had the 2 out of 3 falls match with American Dragon Bryan Danielson and the Dragon Slayer Daniel Garcia, with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat in the crowd. I'm sensing they had a theme going on with this particular show. Call it a hunch. Oh, and Jericho was on commentary too. Broken face and all. And here's what I will say about this match. How you feel about it is very dependent on whether or not you are fed up with anything on this show pertaining to the Jag-Off Asshole Society. I have said this countless times now, and just so we can put this to bed now, I'm going to get this off my chest so that I don't ever have to revisit this talking point again. Daniel Garcia is a good wrestler. He is a good athlete. He can do some impressive stuff in the ring. But the guy is blander than fucking oatmeal. The dude's got the personality of dry paint. I mean, whatever metaphors you want me to throw out there, it covers everything and anything you ever need to know about Daniel Garcia. Can't cut a promo. Doesn't have anything resembling what you would call an it factor. He's never going to be a world champion in any major wrestling organization. And I'm sorry. No matter how much Tony Khan forces this guy on television week in and week out, it doesn't change any of that. You could push this guy until the cows come home, Tony. You could put him in there with every top guy you have at your disposal. He ain't getting any more over to a national mainstream audience than he is currently. Take out the hardcore marks that you're mainly appealing to right now. This is as over as the guy's ever going to be. And after everything I've seen them do with this guy in the last year, whether it's the sports entertainment comedy junk with Jericho or the nonsensical story with him and Danielson, my opinion of this guy has not changed one iota from the first time I ever saw him on TV. No. In fact, that is a lie. I will rescind that statement. I would actually probably make the argument that I am less interested in Daniel Garcia now than I was when I first saw him. Because it's nonstop with this guy. Every single week on this show, in some form or fashion, one of the most heavily forced guys on this entire show of all people is Daniel fucking Garcia. And for the life of me, I don't get it. And I say heavily forced for a reason. I could say pushed, but no. It's a force. It is a cram. It is a, you will like this guy and deal with it. I can't wrap my brain around it. Samoa Joe, Jay Lethal, Dax Harwood, Cash Wheeler, Miro, Hobbs, Ricky Starks, Wardlow, the guys we actually want to see every week, the guys who can actually make some kind of impact with this company, who could actually draw you money in some capacity, that actually look like grown men, look like people that you can actually take seriously on TV as athletes. Those guys are often left out of the equation or only featured sparingly. But by God, man, we go 1 week without seeing Daniel Garcia. Ooh, we may as well pull the plug on this show, because all hope is lost without that guy. Yeah, a guy who ain't drawn a dime in this business in the next 10 years, and everyone knows it, but fuck, dude, we gotta ram him down everyone's throat like a bitter pill. Tell me I'm lying. Tell me I'm a stick in the mud that I don't know what I'm talking about, that there's this superstar potential in this guy that I'm just not seeing, please inform me. I would love to know what I'm missing. As far as the wrestling goes, the match was fine, I guess. I don't really have a problem with any of the technical stuff they did. My problems more so come with the execution of the finishes, because to me, every single one of these falls fell flatter than a plate full of piss. Okay, first of all, we should establish this. It's 2 out of 3 falls. Why? I don't know. More importantly, I don't care. But the first fall of this thing comes less than 10 minutes in, and I'm not kidding you. This is the finish they came up with for the first fall. Not even the conclusion to the third fall, but the first fall is Danielson has Garcia in a triangle hold. And Garcia manages to hoist Danielson up into a piledriver position. He then spikes Danielson on top of his head with said piledriver. Keep in mind, they've been telling the story of Danielson's history of neck injuries. The reason this guy had to fucking retire his first go-around because of all the neck complications. So Garcia hits Danielson with his piledriver on the bad neck. Not only does he beat Danielson here in the first fall of this 2 out of 3 falls match, not only is it not the conclusion of the match and a stretcher angle to put Danielson out of action, but he doesn't even get the fall after the piledriver. He locks in a neck crank, and Danielson passes out. All right, I give up. I've tapped. I've come to accept the reality that this business has totally passed me by, and I have no fucking clue or concept of what modern wrestling is anymore. The first fall of this 2 out of 3 falls match, and it's Garcia beating Danielson flat with a submission hold after spiking him on his head with a piledriver. Not an injury angle, not the final fall of the match, not even a pitch to commercial. Because within seconds of this first fall, Bryce Remsburg, without ringing the bell or signaling to the timekeeper to start the second fall, he begins counting Danielson down, and then all of a sudden we are in the second fall of the match. So Danielson beats the count. They do some spot in the corner where Garcia hits the running drop kick, and that is when they pitched a commercial. So they come back, and I mean, this is where the uncontrolled laughter just started creeping in again, because when they come back, Danielson is now mysteriously bleeding from the forehead. Apparently, he was taking up advice from Moxley before the show and was convinced to do a totally pointless blade job for no reason. Then we come to find out that the reason Danielson was bleeding was that he took a DDT onto the exposed concrete during the commercial. Oh my God. Yeah, make this shit up, folks. I'm not exaggerating any of this in the slightest. Telling you like it is. So yeah, after this second injury angle that we did not get to see live, unless you were paying attention in picture, which, I mean, who actually does that? They come back with Danielson bleeding, and probably within a minute of them returning from break, they had Garcia get reversed in a submission attempt, and Danielson got the second fall from out of nowhere. Flatter than a hooker's ass. Just 1, 2, 3 out of nowhere. Barely even got a reaction out of anyone. probably because there was no build up to it at all. So then we got the third fall. Once again, no bell or anything to signify the actual start of the last fall, because nobody in this company knows how to agent or structure anything properly. So they do more stuff for a while. There's a contrived spot on the floor where Garcia and Danielson were cooperatively pulling one another into the ring post shoulder first while they linked arms. I wrote down fake in all caps. Somehow in this fall, Garcia bladed across the side of the head. Might have been during their 87th commercial break during this match alone. Then they come back. Danielson and Garcia are on the mat trying to go back and forth with submission holds. And then finally, the finish is Danielson locking in the label lock and forcing a ref stoppage. And I wrote, thank Christ. This thing went almost a full half hour. And by the time it was over, I can confidently say, for better or worse, this was the first Bryan Danielson match in AEW history where I was anxiously waiting for it to end. What a fall from grace for that poor guy. And while it's on my mind, let me just talk about this real quick. The Bryan Danielson thing, man. I honestly don't even know how I can accurately describe it now. Other than disappointment. I am genuinely disappointed to see what has happened to this guy in the last year. 12 months ago, Bryan Danielson was on top of the world. Dude was having great matches every week. He was on top of his game. The people were ecstatic to see him jump ship to AEW. And I mean, saying they've neutered him almost feels like an understatement. I'd even go so far as to say that they've cut his balls out from under him and stapled them to a goddamn doormat. I mean, he's obviously hurt. I don't know how much he has left in the tank at this stage. And man, when you think of missed opportunities and wasted potential, I'm telling you, man, when AEW finally kicks the bucket and we look back at their ultimate demise and ask, what was the single biggest disappointment about AEW's entire existence? I put Bryan Danielson at the top of that list, no question. Because that dude was white hot when he first showed up. And they have squandered all of that momentum in the last year. Actually, less than that. When did Danielson debut for AEW? Was it All Out last year? I think that's what it was. So yeah, 11 months. That is all it took. And they have completely butchered Danielson's AEW run at virtually every turn. And of course, the most baffling thing about the whole thing, he wasn't even the central focus of the segment. I mean, yeah, he won, but the fallout had virtually nothing to do with Danielson and everything to do with Jericho and Garcia. Because Jericho gets in the ring and starts pounding away on Danielson after the bell, only for Garcia to pull him off and get into a shoving match, and then Jericho walks away. And the only question that immediately hit me as soon as they started teasing dissension with Garcia and Jericho, did this group literally not just formed less than 4 months ago? And they are already teasing a breakup? Seriously. So that was that segment. I'm not making anything up there. That was a segment that actually happened on the show. Did I say that match was fine? I think I have to take that back. So following that, we were supposed to get a Tony Nese match, but Jon Moxley jumped Nese and Mark Sterling on the ramp. And by that, I mean he clubbed Nese in the back of the head and then tripped over his own feet trying to deck Sterling. I mean, that one kind of writes itself. I can make the two left feet joke, but Mox just demonstrated it firsthand. God, that guy sucks. And of course, he got in the ring and started strutting and bee-boo bopping all over the ring, calling out Punk to fight him again. And then Punk came out. They both got pulled apart by security again, and that was that. I mean, hey, I'll give him this. You know, I constantly complain on this show that these idiots never follow up with anything from previous segments that occur earlier on. At least they bother to follow up with something on the show. So, I will throw out positives where we can. And speaking of follow-ups, we had a second one here with Jericho and his posse backstage that I actually ended up liking by the end. Not because the segment was good, but because the comedy relief was off the charts. Starts with Jericho telling Garcia that he wants an answer as to what side he's on, whether it's the Jagoff Asshole Squad or the Blackpool Fucks, and he wants the answer next week on Dynamite. He wants to talk to him next week in a segment on television. You can't just text the fucking guy? Why do you have to wait 7 days to get an answer to find out what side Garcia is on? Just shoot the guy a text or give him a call. It's 2022, dude. I mean, better yet, message the fucking guy on Facebook. So, here's where the segment got good. In walks Ricky Steamboat to confront Jericho. And him and Jericho are going back and forth with each other. And eventually Jericho walks off and tells Steamboat to stay out of his face, basically. And after Steamboat tries to pursue one of the 2.0 geeks, I think it was Angelo Parker, he holds Steamboat back, starts getting in his face. And the payoff is Steamboat giving Parker a karate chop to the chest and laying him out. And this was so ridiculous, I just laughed at it. Even in 2022, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat's chops look more convincing than any fake chop you see the boys do in the business today. I mean, it looked more real than Eddie Kingston's machine gun chops, I can say that much. Then we had another bewildering segment that left me laughing uproariously because of how stupid it was. First, they had a Varsity Blondes Ass Boys match where Colton and Austin beat Pillman and Garrison in about 20 seconds, and that immediately led to Father Billy getting in the ring to cut a promo. By the way, for those of you that caught this live, did you see in the background while Billy was talking, you see Brian Pillman walking down the aisleway to help Garrison to the back, not even bothering to sell anything? You think that dude's given up? So, now Billy's going off about this, that, and the other thing. Says he's on track to getting his sons back on their winning ways. And this led to Stokely Hathaway coming out from the back to, well, just kind of stand at the top of the stage to set up what everyone saw coming a mile away, if it already wasn't obvious. From absolutely out of nowhere, the Gun Sons jump Papa Billy and start putting the boots to him, because we have not had a heel swerve on this show in at least 2 weeks. So we're about overdue for another one here. Yes, the story is Billy Gunn wanted to ensure that his sons got back on track with winning matches. So after getting them a match on TV where they won in very convincing fashion, the Gun Sons then turn on their father because they're dicks. So this prompts the Acclaimed to run out for the save. They eventually send Austin and Colton packing. I think this is where JR just totally phoned it in for the night and didn't even pretend like he gave a fuck. And with the Acclaimed in the ring, Bowens looks around. He glances at Billy in the corner. And he sticks his fingers out to make the scissor sign. And he goes, "Scissor me, daddy!" And that prompts Billy to leap to his feet, completely no-sells the beating he just took from Austin and Colton. And well, I guess Billy's back to managing the Acclaimed again. I mean, it's hard for me to hate on it just because I don't care and it doesn't make a difference at all. I mean, the Acclaimed gun storyline has gone back and forth for weeks now with Papa Billy jumping sides seemingly every other week. It's an absurd mid-card feud, but whatever. It's not for me, but the people pop for it, so I guess I can't complain about it that much. I can complain about this, though. We had Jungle Boy come out for a promo of some sort. And by that, I mean it was barely audible because the dumb fuck was holding the microphone down by his chest, so it sounded like you were watching with the volume turned all the way down. No, legitimately, I started fucking with my audio because I thought something was wrong on my end. No, turns out, kid just doesn't know how to cut a live promo on television after, 3 years on a live cable TV? So he starts by making jokes about his t-shirt that he supposedly got in trouble for wearing a couple weeks back. You know, the one that read, "Christian Cage is a pussy." Yeah. Who'd have thunk the network was going to have a problem with that one? Anyway, he's talking. And he's talking. The crowd begins whatting him at one point. And there's a point where he just stops during his promo to turn over his shoulder and look in the general direction of where the chants were coming from. And then he just goes back to talking again. And finally, after boring us into a coma, we had Christian Cage finally come out to try and breathe some form of life into this thing. And he starts trying to lull Jungle Boy into a false sense of security by saying he doesn't want to fight or wrestle him, but he wants to hash things out. So he gets in the ring. Keep in mind, Jungle Boy literally just got done talking about how he's been impatiently waiting to get his hands on this motherfucker for weeks now. So here he is, in the flesh. Christian voluntarily gets into the ring with Jungle Boy. And Jungle Boy stands there. And he stands there. Christian's talking about trying to patch things up and get back together on good terms with him. All the while, I am screaming at Jungle Boy to the top of my lungs, "You dumb fuck, get this guy and start pummeling his ass. You stupid babyface." So finally, Jungle Boy gives Christian the double takedown. He begins wailing away on him. And Jungle Boy beats on him. And he beats on him. Christian tries to escape. Jungle Boy runs after him and starts beating on him again. And they brawl around ringside. And it finally culminates with Jungle Boy stomping on Christian's arm onto the stairs. He slams the back of his head into the steps several times over, basically renders the guy unconscious before geeks try to run out and separate them. And by the end of this, I thought, so Jungle Boy got his revenge, right? I mean, he left him for dead. Is there any reason to buy the pay-per-view to see this match now? I mean, come on, I'm not trying to nitpick this thing to death, but seriously, what is there left to pay to see at this point? Jungle Boy got his hands on Christian. He practically left the guy a battered and beaten mess by the end of it. What am I supposed to pay for in 3 weeks? To see Jungle Boy get a pinfall win on Christian? To pin his shoulders to the mat? Wow. Wow. How enticing. Can't wait to see these guys exchange holds and have a pro wrestling match. That'll be some good stuff. So then we had a women's match that actually caught my eye last week when they announced it. Especially if you watch my Monday podcast where we've reviewed NWA Power. The match was Kylan King versus Toni Storm. And I have seen a handful of Kylan's matches now, and I've talked about it several times. She's pretty good for her level of experience. She's got size. She's got a good amount of charisma. Her stuff looks good. She's very professional. I've really dug Kylan's work from what I've seen. Yeah, she's still green, but I've seen the progression in her work. You know, that match she had with Camille at the last NWA event, that was one of the better women's matches I've seen in the entire year in any wrestling company. So I actually decided to sit down and watch this match and pay attention to it for a change. You can't win them all. It's about the best I can say about it. You know, the other issue, too, was the placement of the thing, because, you know, I knew before they even rang the bell that I really wasn't going to be engaged with this like I probably would have if maybe they booked it in the first hour. I watched it. It existed. Did it need to go through a commercial break? I don't know about all that, but, you know, they both worked hard. Kylan looked a little out of place for a couple things, but, you know, in comparison to most women's matches on this show, it was better than normal. I'm grasping at straws if you already can't tell. It was better than the Jade Cargill match last week. It's quite the compliment, I know. I guess they're doing Thunder Rosa and Toni Storm at All Out for the women's title. Okay, cool. Would have been nice to maybe see Thunder Rosa on the show to, you know, do something. But what do I know? But we got one last thing to cover here, and I was going to skip over this because I'm trying to disassociate myself as much as humanly possible from this whole trios tournament. Everything about it I have determined is nothing more than a vanity project for all the elite fucks to keep themselves occupied in their own little corner of the lunchroom, separate from the rest of the roster. And more power to them, because quite frankly, I don't really need to see these guys on TV at all. However, we all knew who the big mystery man for this match was. The Beta Bucks' playmate, for lack of better terms. But yes, this was the official ring return for Kenny Omega. They really rolled out the red carpet for this thing. It was quite the spectacle. Everything from the wacky ring introduction with Justin Roberts, the ring gear, the fact that this guy actually resembles a real-life caricature of Harpo Marx the more I see him. Actually, you know who he always reminded me of, visually speaking? Maybe I'm the only one that ever thought this, but here's another visual that'll never escape your memory. A young Gene Wilder. Look it up. And unfortunately, after having listened to so many Cornette podcasts of him calling or poking fun at all of Kenny Omega's mannerisms, it really is one of those you see it once, you can't unsee it sort of deals. And the entire time, anytime Omega was in there offensively in this match, I just started laughing. Because this is copying an exact quote from Punk in the opening promo where he kept telling the fans to let him know when he was lying. Seriously. What has Cornette said about Kenny Omega's matches that is untrue? The excessive finger pointing, the cartoonish facials, the ballet leaps, the Scooby-Doo running animations where he runs in place for about 8 seconds before taking off. It was all there. I mean, the dude may have some ring rust to work off of, but those gesticulations, he's got those down to a fucking T. Going back to the ring gear for a minute, though, I'm still trying to figure out what exactly the point of the compression shirt was. Is he still that out of ring shape where he has to wear a cover-up for his upper body? I mean, if so, that signifies to me that he may not be as fully recovered as we were led to believe going into this thing. I mean, I know this has been one of Tony Khan's wet dreams of being able to do this whole trios tournament deal with the high school comedy club, but I mean, if the guy's still pretty beat up, is it really smart to be putting him in this kind of situation where he's risking further injury? Because listen, I've never been the biggest fan of Kenny Omega's matches, but I'm even willing to acknowledge when the guy's had good showings. And I know everyone's immediately going to rush to his defense here and spew out, it's ring rust, it's going to take time, whatever. But seriously, let's just call it as it is. Let's be rational thinking people here for a minute. Kenny did not look good at all in this match. I mean, it was obvious they were overcompensating for the fact that he's not fully healed yet. But even when you remove the ring rust from the discussion, you factor in the compression shirt and the leg brace and the fact that he was clearly struggling at various points in the match. I mean, take out all your pro-Kenny biases for a minute here and just try to be rational about this whole thing. Is it really smart to be putting the guy back in the ring if he's not fully healed yet? And here's the thing that's really scary. It's been about 9 months with him being out of the ring in any physical capacity. If he's still not fully healed at 100% after all that recovery time he's had, and he's going out there wrestling with the braces and all the protective gear, maybe that's a red flag. Again, this is coming from someone that is not a big fan of Omega, but I'm at least trying to look at this thing objectively. And even looking past that, I wouldn't say that Omega was working particularly smart in the match to begin with, because he was still doing some pretty dangerous looking stuff at various points. Not that the rest of the guys in the match were going out of their way to protect anyone, period. I mean, I particularly like the spot where they set up the overly convoluted, completely reckless guardrail spot where Roosh and Andrade's assistant held up Omega so that Dragon Lee could do the flying senton. And after one of the announcers asked what the ref is doing about the situation, Don Callis, of all people, stating the obvious, not much. Touche. Yeah, by the way, I failed to mention that, but Don Callis was back too, so yeah, I guess we're going to have to deal with him on TV going forward again. I mean, whatever. I'd never really had any problem with Don Callis. It's just his association with the Elite stuff just kind of tuned me out. But that particular spot was probably the most notable thing about the match. And it was only notable because I thought Omega was fucking dead afterwards. Everything else was the usual. It was typical nonsensical beta bucks infested bullshit that we've all come to expect by now. It was a 20-minute roundabout carousel of nonstop moves, and to coin a great quote, for the kind of people that like that kind of shit, that's the kind of shit those people are going to like. I mean, I just spent the entirety of the match expressing concern for Omega's health and praying he got out of there without severely injuring himself again. Again, not a fan of his matches, but I'm also not a completely heartless bastard. I mean, the style of match isn't going to last long, and I know they're going to keep doing it because it's the only style they know how to do, and it always comes back to bite them in the ass. I mean, you want an example, look at the majority of AEW's roster. 50% of them are on the injured list. All that wear and tear on the body can't be sustained, especially in this era where everyone's taking reckless bumps night after night. So, match was what it was. I hated it, but I also hate the style of wrestling, so it goes without saying. I laughed at a good chunk of it. No tags in or out, people running in and out of the ring nonstop, a bald referee just standing around with his hand on his cock playing with himself. And to close the show, I shit you not, this is exactly what happened. Omega pins Dragon Lee with the one-winged angel. They play Omega's music. Him and the Bucks are celebrating on the ramp. And then, off camera, completely at random, for no reason, Andrade hits Dragon Lee with the hammerlock DDT, and then my DVR cut out. I believe the closing lines from the commentary team was Excalibur screaming, "Oh, Andrade just turned on Dragon Lee!" And Jim Ross, without hesitation, just throws his hands up in the air and says, "Good night, everybody, for God's sake!" And then Omega looked back at the ring, sporting a facial expression that I can merely describe as him looking like someone crop dusted in his general direction. And I laughed so hard at this, I legitimately pissed myself. I sprung a leak. No shame. This was so fucking retarded on every level. I couldn't even muster up the remaining energy to poon it. I just said, all right, whatever. I don't care. I'm going to bed. So there you have it. I'm going to say I had a lot to cover this week with the Dynamite Report. And I will say this. I am interested to see what they do with the Moxley-Punk title match next week. And like I pointed out at the beginning, man, anything with Punk on this show, I know for a fact that I'm going to be engaged because he's the only guy on this show that manages to get me to feel anything. I believe in what he says and does, and it's why I always pay attention to everything he's involved with. I find it funny how they're just blowing off this Moxley-Punk thing next week on TV. Probably a decision on Punk's part. Saying, you want me to work a program with the Jiffy Lube attendant? Now that doesn't work for me, brother. So that makes me curious as to what they're going to do with the All Out show. If Moxley's even going to be included in that mix. It is entirely possible they do some kind of fucked finish or draw next week and then do a rematch with the same two guys at the pay-per-view, but I don't know, the whole Hangman Page deal makes me think they're going to try and wedge him back into the title hunt. I don't know why. I mean, they've done virtually nothing to make Adam Page feel like a top guy since he lost the fucking belt to Punk to begin with. Guy's been meandering around with a job order every week for the last month and a half, doing his soap opera mopey drama with the Bucks. So, how this factors Page back into the world title equation, I don't get it, but I also don't get a lot of Tony Khan's booking, so guess it makes sense to him, but to anyone with a shred of common sense that watches this show every week, and we're all confused by it. All right, Dan, let's move along here with the retro portion of the podcast. This is NWA World Championship Wrestling from August 16th of the year 1986. And we begin our show this week with what looked to be the next round of the Best of 7 series with Magnum and Nikita. They showed approximately 30 seconds of the clip, which consisted of a collar and elbow tie-up, a headlock, a pair of drop-downs, and a drop kick from Magnum sending Nikita out to the floor, and I believe the crowd broke the Richter scale with the level of pop this got. Back when the fans actually reacted to basic wrestling spots. My times have changed. Then we cut to the studio with Tony Schiavone and David Crockett's mint green blazer, informing us that we now have a new World's Heavyweight Champion. Dusty dropped the belt back to Ric Flair in St. Louis over the past week. But if you also remember from last week's show, they had showed us footage of the Flair-Dusty match from Kansas City, where Tully and Flair had double-teamed Dusty and injured his leg with a chair. So as it turns out, story angle. They indeed shot that angle in Kansas City because the Horsemen knew that Dusty had to defend the belt against Flair just 2 days later in St. Louis, and those dastardly pricks knew damn good and well that if Dusty went into that match at 100%, he may have very well beaten Flair again. So they devised a plan. They were going to target Dusty's leg so that he did not go into St. Louis at full health, and that way Flair had an easy outing to reclaim the belt. It's almost like these motherfuckers knew how to book wrestling properly or something to that extent back in the day. They also informed us that the best of 7 between Magnum and Nikita is now tied at 3 apiece. So they're going to be diving into that story later on. So this brought out Jimmy Cornette as special commentator for the program, immediately calling out David Crockett for looking like a bullfrog. The best part, David just stands there and takes it. And, Cornette promised that Dusty has another problem on his hands in Big Bubba. And then we cut to the ring for our first match. It's the Kansas Jayhawks taking on George South and one of the Mulkey brothers. I think it was Bill. And he was just a Bill sitting on top of Capitol Hill. Oh, man! Or however the old voice goes. Anyway, I actually had to stop and make sure that I was watching the right episode because I could have sworn that last week's show also began with a Jayhawks tag match, and sure enough, it did. So back-to-back weeks, we got Dirty Dutch and Bobby Jaggers in the opening match on the studio show. Good question from Corny about a minute or so into the match when he asked, why do they call him the Hangman Bobby Jaggers? To which I snidely remarked, good question, Jim. I have been asking the exact same thing about Adam Page for well over 3 years now, and I still haven't figured that one out either. Fine little tag match, though. Lots of swift in-and-out tags from the Jayhawks here, and I like that. Yeah, you don't see a whole lot of that in the business today where guys will do the constant tag rotations just to keep both guys fresh throughout the whole match. It's funny, I was watching this match, and there's a point where Dutch gave Mulkey a snap suplex, and I literally just got done watching a match with Dutch Mantell from Mid-South in the summer of '85. I believe he was wrestling Tommy Rogers. And the first thing I said when I saw Dutch hit Rogers with the move, I'm like, God damn, that guy had a hell of a snap suplex. And then I saw him do it here to Bill Mulkey, and I thought the same thing. Aside from that, though, Jayhawks just beat on that poor Mulkey fella for about 5 minutes until they finally won with the Doomsday Clothesline spot off the second rope. Still teasing a program with them in the Midnights for the World Tag Titles, so that is something to look forward to in the future. Following that, we had the Russians at the booth for a promo, and God help me, Corny gave Crusher Khrushchev the first word. Well, I already took Crusher to task last week for his poor promo ability, so I'm not going to run him up the flagpole again. Just take my word for it. It wasn't good. I don't really know what he said because most of it got drowned out from the crowd. I think he told Dusty that since he lost the world title, it's about time he lost the 6-man world tag trophy as well. So then Ivan turned the whole thing around in a hurry by informing us that the only reason the series with Nikita and Magnum is tied 3-3 is that Ivan was barred from the arena in St. Louis. And there was a grave miscarriage of justice served when Nikita had clearly won the match, even though Magnum's foot was under the bottom rope. And because the NWA officials like fucking with the Russians at every turn, the referee came down to reverse the decision, and that prompted Magnum to allegedly attack nephew Nikita from behind to steal the win. Because he's a cowardly American. So, I think he said that Bob Geigel was going to serve as an impartial referee for their final match to ensure that it is called fair and square. And then Nikita cut probably the best promo of his entire career when he said that tonight in Philadelphia, there will be no USA champion. But he says after it's over, people will be calling from all over the world asking, where is Magnum TA? What happened to Magnum? And the answer is, after Magnum loses in the final round, he's going to crawl in a hole and Nikita will kick the dirt on top of it. And you're probably sitting there asking yourself, how in the fuck were you able to decipher all of that with Nikita's broken English? And the answer is, I honestly have no clue. But thank God for Ivan and Nikita here because they made this whole segment awesome. And Darso was there. Then they came back from the break with the next best segment of all time, I've determined. It's the Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant. And he is out with a purpose. He wasn't shucking. He wasn't jiving. He wasn't being all goofy and over the top. He was dead serious when addressing the statement. But simply put, Paul Jones has driven him to the edge. After being humiliated and having his head shaved courtesy of the Paul Jones Army, Jimmy Valiant is making a promise. By the end of the year 1986, he will shave Paul Jones completely bald. He doesn't know if Jones is going to give him that match, but as far as Valiant is concerned, he doesn't care. Because if he cannot shave Paul Jones bald by the end of 86, then he will quit the one thing he's dedicated his entire life to, professional wrestling. Time's running down on the clock, but Valiant is out for blood. And if he can't get the job done, he's finished. Done. He will walk away from the business and never look back. And you're probably sitting there wondering, well, how is this exactly the greatest segment of all time? And my answer is simply Jimmy Valiant's delivery. I need say no more. Then the Road Warriors killed two job guys, one of whom I was able to determine was Pablo Crenshaw. Absolute decimation. And that was followed with a very low-key Dick Murdoch promo while they were scooping up the job guys in the ring with a shovel. I really didn't say a whole lot here, other than putting over the great talent in the NWA and plugging a match between him and Ric Flair the next day in Huntington, West Virginia for the World Heavyweight Championship. It's literally all there was to it. And then coming back from the break, this is where they dived into more detail with the title change between Flair and Dusty. They began by recapping the Kansas City match where Dusty retained the belt, but Flair's foot was under the bottom rope. And that was the night where JJ and Tully showed up at the building, presumably to shop for clothes. At least that is what Tully told us last week. And there's no way that Tully would lie about anything, right? But they played most of the ending footage of the match, including the run and attack afterwards, where Tully gave Dusty the chair shot to the leg. This was also made better by David Crockett's commentary, scholarly commentary, I should point out. I believe one of his quotes was, "Look at that chair, Tony," as Tully was wailing away on Dusty's leg. To which I said, "Yes, David. That is quite the steel chair that Tully has in his possession." So that led to Tully and JJ joining both guys at the booth to share their insight on the whole angle. Once again, Tully telling us that the only reason the Horsemen were in Kansas City that night was to lay out the challenge to Dusty for the world title and then go buy clothes at, I believe he said Michael's. Isn't Michael's a craft store? Or is that supposed to be a rib that went completely over my head? I mean, was there actually a department store at one point called Michael's? I'm curious. Then he continued with putting over Dusty's match in St. Louis, but on that night, the better man won, Ric Flair. And this was met with the studio crowd cheering and clapping for this title change. Cool heels. What can you say? And then Tully reiterated his point that the reason he attacked Dusty with the chair is that he does not like him. And that goes for the rest of the Horsemen. It was almost a carbon copy promo from what we heard last week, but goddamn, I mean, was it still not awesome? You know, it's actually something you forget a lot about in the business back in the day, where guys would be taping promos so often for live events or television, you almost neglect the fact that they almost cut the exact same promo in some form or fashion. You know, it's something I remember hearing Corny talk about in his podcast, but, you know, it probably accounts for why the boys were such naturals with promo delivery back in the day. Because whether you're rehashing the same material over and over again, I mean, the gist of your dialogue is always drive home whatever your story is and explain to the viewers at home what your issues are with so-and-so. You know, they got so many repetitions of it, it just came to them. It's a problem with the business today, you know, especially with guys in AEW, where guys disappear and appear on television randomly, and if they do cut a promo, it's once every other month, so they don't get a chance to do it that often. Anyhow, we continue with the Flair Dusty story as we now cut to St. Louis, just 2 days after the infamous chair angle in Kansas City. They show the closing moments of their match where Flair had inadvertently bumped the official, which allowed for Flair to target Dusty on the floor and give him one of the weakest chair shots to the leg you've ever seen. And this is so great because the whole story they're playing up here is that while Dusty was selling on the floor and the ref was trying to initiate the 10 count, Dusty could have easily taken the count-out loss, but he would have kept the title. And meanwhile, you got Ric Flair in the ring, counting along with the official, not giving two fucks about the fact that even if Flair wins this match via count-out, he will not walk out with the physical strap. But he doesn't care. All he cares about is getting that W over Dusty. So, of course, Dusty rolls back in. The match continues. Flair is pounding away on Dusty's bad knee. And all of a sudden, Dusty leaps into Super Cena mode and begins making a one-legged comeback on Flair. Then you get to the spot where Dusty has Flair pinned. But this time, when Flair gets his foot on the bottom rope, the ref waves off the call. So after Dusty does the pre-celebratory deal, Flair clips him in the back of the leg from behind, locks him in the figure four. And this is the point where David Crockett went into full Mark mode. Because even though this is taped footage and he already knows the end result of the match, he is telling us, the viewers watching at home, Dusty can do it. Watch him. And Dusty's fighting. He's clawing. You got Magnum on the floor cheering him on. And there's David still valiantly getting behind Dusty to make his comeback. I love this man dearly. But the pain ends up becoming too much for Dusty. So his shoulders fall to the mat. And the ref counts 1. The ref counts 2. And the ref counts 3. Now, of course, you have to keep in mind that Dusty is the booker at this point in 86. So if he was going to drop that strap back to Flair, he was going to make him work for it, brother. I'll do the job, but we're making sure I come out of this thing looking like fucking God. Surviving a lethal chair shot to the leg, defending the belt 2 days after the fact, making a one-legged comeback after having your leg taken out again, and holding frame in that figure four for almost an entire 2-minute period before not tapping out, but passing out due to the pain. The ultimate babyface protection. Hey, no one ever said Dusty was stupid. That man knew how to protect himself at all costs, and God bless him for it. What a genius. So that took us back to the interview booth with Tony and Ric Flair, dressed in full white from head to toe. And here's what I wrote down about this promo, and it's not entirely off base now that I look back at it after the fact. Ric Flair proceeded to cut a semi-shoot promo on how big, bad, and tough the NWA is, doing everything possible to underhandedly cut the WWF's balls out from underneath of them. Talked about how the National Wrestling Alliance is the only true sport where men come to wrestle. And I guess we're meant to take that as, meanwhile, in the WWF, you have cartoon characters. And he's not entirely wrong. I mean, a couple years down the road, the number one guy in the company was the Ultimate Warrior, who couldn't wrestle his way out of a goddamn paper bag. So, anyhow, he took some shots at Dusty and talked about how he capitalized on an opportunity, and that is why he's now the number one man once again. He also got in the line at the end where he said that while he's escorting one girl on his right and one girl on his left, he's not telling us which girl he's bringing back to the hotel that night. You know, to fuck. So coming back from break, we had the Road Warriors and Paul Ellering out for a promo. Ellering took a minute to put his men over, and I think he made a Winston Churchill reference. In the closing line, I did write this down. He said, "When it comes to the Road Warriors, you'll never get the best of us, only the worst of us." That's a very underrated line. Someone should steal it and use it. So then Animal passionately shouted about all the upcoming towns that the Road Warriors were going to be visiting. He was particularly excited to be back in Bloomington, Minnesota. Never heard of it. And then Hawk promised that the Horsemen would pay for their actions and talked about how they don't care about belts or titles. What they care about is getting in the ring and beating people up. I think I now see why Hawk and Animal were not particularly great heels at any point in their career. Seriously, who would ever want to boo these men? They talk about visiting towns, seeing all their fan favorites, and going to beat people up and win matches. I fail to see how anyone would want to hate them for this. And I think that 2 years later, they tried to turn them heel, and well, we'll get to it. Spoiler alert, it failed. Then we had Superstar Bill Dundee versus Vernon Deaton. And the most notable thing about the entire segment is the back and forth with Cornette, Schiavone, and Crockett, where during this match, Schiavone and Crockett were taking the time to plug birthdays and special anniversaries for all the NWA fans that sent in postcards. I also believe they plugged a Houston Astros ball player who was in attendance. And meanwhile, Cornette, the rational-minded man in this situation, began shaming and admonishing these men for not bothering to call the ring action. But instead they were wasting time addressing fan mail. I highly support Cornette in this argument. I also supported the studio crowd during the spot where Dundee was working over Deaton's arm. They began a "break it" chant. Bill Dundee was a heel, everyone. Keep that in mind. In fact, looking back at the show, this is a very pro-heel audience for the entire taping. Dundee won with the bombs away drop off the top rope. Then we cut to a Dusty interview, post-title loss, conducted with Bill Apter. And, well, Dusty covered a lot of ground here after being asked the simple question of, "How's your knee?" And boy, did Dusty have a roundabout way of getting there. Said that he didn't want to conduct any interviews after losing to Flair because he was dealing with a lot of stress from the fallout. He takes a page out of the Flair playbook from earlier by putting over Jim Crockett Promotions and how it is the most coveted sports organization in wrestling. And then he gets into the whole discussion of losing what Dusty claimed to be a fair fight to the Nature Boy in St. Louis. There was no interference, no towels being thrown in. The bottom line, Dusty lost that match fair and square. To which the Dusty mark in me immediately said, "No, Dusty. In fact, we watched the tape from earlier on, and it was clear as day that you went into that match with a disadvantage. Because Flair had hit you with a chair just 2 nights prior behind the ref's back." But no. Dusty admitted to losing a supposed fair fight, and that he is not making any excuses, injury or not. What a fucking man's man babyface that guy was. So, said he's out to recapture the World Heavyweight title, but right now, he has his eyes set on the rest of the Horsemen because they have vowed to end Dusty's career by the end of '86. But he's not going to let that happen because he has a dream to fulfill, and it is all encapsulated in the world title. And even though history has it written that Dusty had his shoulders pinned to the mat for 3 seconds, history can also record that dreams live on. So yeah, his leg is hurt, but as long as he can still crawl or limp, it will never stop him from reclaiming the title. I did not do this promo justice, by the way. Of course, I can't do most Dusty promos justice because, he had an inherent gift for connecting with people on promo delivery. It's probably why he still ranks among my all-time faves. So we go from that to a Paul Jones promo. It was not as good as the Dusty interview. He talked about how he got out of the Delta Airlines earlier, and he was overcome with good feelings about the rest of the day. To which I said, well, I'd be overcome with good feelings too if I made it out of the fucking airport alive. Again, I can't think of a worse place to be in 2022 than an airport. But he talked about Manny Fernandez again, and how he offered him a place in the Paul Jones Army for a substantial amount of money. Told him basically to take the money if he knows what's good for him. Then he told Jimmy Valiant that he's trying to plant the idea in everyone's mind that the Paul Jones Army is trying to avoid him, when it's the complete contrary argument. Now they've embarrassed and humiliated Jimmy. Paul Jones wants nothing more than to get in that ring and slap him around for a while and reveal his bald head to the crowd. Then he concluded that Valiant can quit wrestling now, because as long as Paul Jones' army is around, Valiant will never shave his head, and Paul Jones will have his hair forever. It's quite the prediction, especially if Mother Nature has anything to say about it. Keeping your hair forever. Boy, I wish. Up next, we had a 6-man tag. It is Ole, Arn, and Tully against the team of the Italian Stallion, Sam Houston, and Toddy Champion. Has anyone with the name Todd actually had a nickname of Toddy at any point in their life? If so, I apologize. I had to draw attention to this because this is just how analytical I am of these matches back in the day. There's a deep conversation that occurs in the early stages of this match with David Crockett and Cornette, where they are having a rational discussion on the fact that Ole, Arn, and Tully have been a functioning unit for so long now, and meanwhile, Stallion, Houston, and Champion have never been a team at any point. So, David Crockett, of all people, the analyst in this situation, accurately points out a very interesting detail. He says, if Stallion, Houston, and Champion have not teamed up as a 3-man group before, that means that Ole, Arn, and Tully really don't have a way to prepare for them. And Cornette responds by simply going, I agree. Yes, David Crockett was actually serving in the role of the sports analyst for about one segment on the entire show. Amazing. An amazing man. Never forget. Also amazing, Jim Cornette admonishing Sam Houston for being a stupid green babyface. Houston gets a hot tag early on and starts running wild on Tully, but then he decides to try and pop in a few shots on the Andersons on the apron, and it backfires because they grab a hold of Houston and start fighting back, which allows for Tully to knee him from behind. And of course, Corny does not hesitate to call out Houston for being, I think he referred to him, no joke, as a hot dog, which I don't believe is an insider term, although it is entirely possible that the boys used it at one point. Basically called him an idiot. So, of course, the heels start dissecting poor Houston. They end up running him shoulder first into the outside post behind Pee-wee's back, and that was their commercial pitch. And when they come back from break, I'm not kidding, I wrote this entire sequence down because this is what happened. Houston hot tags champion. Champion gets in a few forearms to Ole before immediately getting cut off by all the horsemen. And then Tully and Arn hit the double-assisted gourd buster and immediately pin him. A return from commercial, and the remainder of the match goes 1 minute. Still a fun match. Anytime the horsemen are in action, beating dudes up like a pack of dogs, it's always entertaining. So following that, we cut back to Tony at the booth, who plugged a couple things that we would be seeing later on in the program, including the footage of the Magnum Nikita match. And then we immediately cut back to the ring for a Dick Murdoch-Tony Zane match. It goes 10 seconds, and Murdoch won with the brainbuster. And then we cut back to the interview desk with Ole and Arn out for a promo with Corny. There was some weird formatting on this episode. So Arn starts off by mocking the whole idea of the American dream, says the idea of working hard, putting in effort, and that good things come to those people, he thinks that idea sucks. It makes him want to puke. Says that the American dream is dead, and the only real way to deem success is by going out in the world and taking what you want, just like the horsemen do, because that is what real men do. Which, again, I know Arn is a heel, but let's be honest, he's not wrong. Just saying. Then he concludes by running down all the horsemen's accolades and actually giving the people some valuable insight. If you want to be someone, don't sit around with your hands out trying to be nice. If you want to be someone, get in the gym, have goals, and go out in the world and seize what you want. I had no idea Arn was so red pill. Good advice. Very practical advice. Unfortunately, not many people would take it because people are weak, especially in this generation. By the way, this is a terrible heel promo. It was a fantastic fucking promo from Arn. Horrible promo if he was trying to be a bad guy. There is not a single thing he said in this entire promo that I did not agree with or found remotely wrong. I also don't think like most people do, so perhaps I saw this differently than the average listener would. Oh yeah, and Ole Anderson, completely ignored in this promo. So here's a rarity we had not seen a whole lot of up to this point. Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey joining Corny at the interview booth. Granted, they didn't say anything, but even having them there in a physical sense, it was kind of surprising. But this was all about showing footage of the most recent Big Bubba Dusty incident. They showed footage of a taping on Worldwide Wrestling, where Corny and Baby Doll were hashing it out on the stick. I know how that probably sounds, but I meant microphone. Anyway, Cornette was giving Baby Doll the ultimatum of ultimatums here, saying if Dusty doesn't apologize to Bubba, some bad things were going to happen to Baby Doll. And after standing up to Corny and saying that Dusty doesn't apologize to anyone, Cornette pulled Bubba into Baby Doll, ended up knocking her over onto the floor. And after Bubba tried to go over and grab a hold of her hair, Dusty ran in from behind and smashed what appeared to be a garbage can lid over Bubba's head. Had the greatest sound effect you'd ever heard. And while Dusty and Bubba are tussling and brawling on the floor, that's when some of the locker room heels and faces run out to separate them. Great little angle they shot here. And the camera cuts with the heels backing off and leaving through the doorway. And Cornette shouting back to Dusty, saying he's going to get his. Great stuff. And then cutting back to the booth very quickly, Corny vowed that Dusty would rue the day that he smashed Bubba in the back of the head with a gimmick. I think he claimed it was a steel chair, but I mean, to me it looked like a trash can lid. The footage was also grainy, so I could be wrong. By the way, I wanted to point this out. Dennis Condrey was so fantastic here because while Corny is standing there admonishing Dusty and essentially promising that he was going to get his, Condrey is standing to the side, pointing and nodding in agreement. Just being a total douche. Loved it. Then we cut back to the ring for another six-man tag. This time it is the Russians teaming up, and gonna be honest, I didn't even bother writing the guys' names down. The match went approximately 1 minute, and Nikita killed one of the guys with the best Russian sickle of all time. I watched it back 3 or 4 times. Cornette also screamed and ranted on Dusty the entire time, which prompted Tony to try and encourage him to calm down. That was funny. But the six-man was mostly a tune-up to build to the Magnum Nikita clip from their previous match in the Best of 7 from Asheville, North Carolina. So they showed the last several minutes where Crusher had run interference on the apron, which caused the inadvertent ref bump after Magnum collided with him. A lot of ref bumps back in the day. And that is immediately followed with Nikita hitting Magnum with the sickle. And as he's going for the pin, Magnum's foot is under the bottom rope. And the way they filmed this was so perfectly done because Tommy Young, the ref that got bumped here, he starts stirring to his feet on the floor, and he's got a clear line of sight to see that Magnum's foot is under the bottom rope. However, there's a second official that runs in to count the 3, but he does not see Magnum's foot. So while the referees are having a chat, Nikita's celebrating with the title in the ring, thinking he's won. And after the second ref pries the title away from him, saying the match will continue, immediately Magnum spins him around, hits Nikita with the belly-to-belly for the 3. And the response to this was so deafening. Seriously, you'd have thought this was the final culmination to the series, when in actuality, it was the tiebreaker. Well, not so much tiebreaker. I mean, the match was tied at 3-3 at this point. But God, the people went fucking bonkers for that finish. Unreal. By the way, I don't know if you guys can hear this right now, but my stomach is really churning. It's probably barely audible, but I'm sorry. I can't help myself. I'm drinking water and coffee right now, so I'm kind of on an empty stomach. So if you hear gurgling going on in the background, that's my intestines having a conniption. Anyway, so we had Baby Doll and Magnum out to comment. Well, Magnum commented. Baby Doll just stood there and smiled. But Magnum said that this whole conflict with him and Nikita has gone on long enough. Says he's tired of waking up every day and having to think about the USSR and everything the Russians represent. Says after this weekend, when the dust clears, there's going to be a new U.S. heavyweight champion. And Nikita knows deep down that Magnum is the man that's going to get the job done. And when you think about it, despite the fact that I've made fleeting jokes about the whole Nikita Magnum feud, it's gone on for the entirety of 1986, when you get past the preliminary stages of this whole thing where both guys were out on the show cutting almost the exact same promo every week on the show, the last few episodes where they've shown the Bash Tour matches, you realize just how white fucking hot this feud was. Now that we're at the tail end of the series, it goes to show how that long-term story development really paid off in the end. Then we come back from break with, as I wrote down here, the conclusion of the Rock and Roll Summer Sizzler contest series, and Cornette's facial reaction told the story. Gags and face palms. All very accurate representations of my exact thoughts on the Summer Sizzler contest. But they brought out the contest winners, not to the actual studio, but whatever venue this was taped at. And I wrote nothing down about it, aside from the fact that there was one girl named Tanya Smithers who was either wearing high heels or she was legitimately 6'10". She towered over every single one of these people, including Ricky and Robert. So that was that. By the way, if you're asking, were they hot? Nah. The first girl they brought out wasn't too bad looking, but I've seen hotter. It was the 80s, different time. Women had wacky hairstyles back then. So then we cut to the ring for a Rock and Roll Express versus Bill Tab Art Pritz match. Of course, the first thing out of Cornette's mouth here was to admonish all of the contest series winners by calling them fat cows. Wouldn't go that far. I get it, though. He's a heel. By the way, I know Cornette's made jokes on this program before about Crockett Promotions bringing in guys from the street to work squash matches. I am not entirely convinced that Art Pritz was not actually a homeless bum that they brought in off the streets. He looked like fucking garbage, wrestled like garbage too, but he definitely had the homeless look. Oh yeah, and Ricky and Robert won with the double drop kick. Write that one down. And then we had the show closing Horseman promo. Ole got to chime in here and say that the Horsemen are back in full effect, and they're making good on their word that they will rid Dusty of professional wrestling by the end of the year. This is great because Corny went to try and pass off the mic to JJ for commentary, and JJ just pointed at Tully and shook his head. Whoops. Even Tully broke kayfabe here and started laughing about it. But, this is so great. He says that they were at Myrtle Beach the other day, lounging back and observing the ladies on the beach. But they were also there to do some shopping. So Ric Flair revealed a beautiful diamond ring that all members of the Horsemen chipped in to buy for their manager, JJ, for all of his hard work and dedication into making the Horsemen who they are. A $40,000 ring, by the way. If I only had the money. But JJ promises that they will wear it, or that he will wear it with pride, because when he looks around at all the diamonds and gold in the Horsemen, he sees that they all wear it with pride as well. Minus Ole, I guess. And he says, diamonds are forever. The 4 Horsemen are forever. And they all put their hands in and go, yeah. This is fucking awesome. As was this show. Another 60-minute program. They did not have the full 90-minute slot for this particular week. Shame. I mean, what can you say, though, man? These guys were the most elite level of talents back in the day. One of the truly greatest periods in the entire history of the wrestling business, and we're reliving it right here, right now, every week as part of the Retro Review series. You know, this is what I grew up on. I love going back and watching these shows and remembering a time when wrestling used to actually be taken seriously and people didn't view it as a complete joke. I mean, you're really long for the days we can go back to that, but it'll probably never happen. especially in today's culture. You know, I always say it, but this is the kind of wrestling I love. It's what I grew up watching. Real men acting like grown men on TV. I mean, you watch these shows and the only thing you can think after it's over is, man, this is a group of dudes that breed masculinity. Not all that toxic masculinity bullshit that people are trying to artificially contrive when complaining about men today, but honest to God, masculine fucking men. Where did those kinds of men go? We need more of it today. We really do. Anyway, we still got a little more to go here, so let's move on to World Class Championship Wrestling. August 20th, 1983. And the first thing on my notes for this show, thank God, Bill Mercer shaved his porn stash. I can now sleep at night. So the actual program began with a tape match from, I believe the graphic said April 1st. It is a match between the Iceman King Parsons and Michael Hayes. A match that I probably reviewed back in April, although I had no recollection of it at the time. Mercer did draw attention here to the angle on TV where the Iceman had slapped Hayes across the face. I would presume that is right around the point where Parsons started getting more involved with the Freebirds and story. The entirety of the match went roughly 2 minutes, and it consisted of the following. The Iceman threw Hayes around the ring with a series of hip tosses, and then Hayes whipped the Iceman off the ropes. Iceman ducked under and went for a crossbody dive, and then Hayes rolled through and won with his feet on the bottom rope. That was the whole thing. I'm not entirely sure what the point of replaying the match was for, considering that the main event of the show was the Freebirds teaming up to face the Von Erichs, but there you go. So following that, we cut back to the desk with Mercer, and he started by talking about the land of the giants, specifically referencing Kamala, the Ugandan warrior, who has been a stable of world class up to this point. But his specific point is to address what happens when two big men collide with each other in the ring. So we then cut to footage of Mid-South Wrestling from February of the year 1983, a very famous angle for those of you that do not know your territorial history, the night that Kamala body slammed Andre the Giant on television. For the record, I remember that angle without having to actually go back and look at the date. That is how memorable that angle was. I remember everything off the top of my head. Now, of course, what they forgot to show you was the only reason that Kamala was able to get Andre up to begin with was because Ted DiBiase had stunned Andre by hitting him in the back of the head with a loaded glove. Always be sure to check your sources. There's always more to the story than what you're led to believe. But, for all the WWF revisionist history out there where they tried to make you think for years that Hulk Hogan was the first guy to ever body slam Andre. Wrong. It's actually happened several times well before WrestleMania 3. You never know about it with the way Vince used to like to try and rewrite history. So following that, Mercer showed a series of tapes where Bruiser Brody had gotten involved with Kamala's segments. Obviously, this is a feud that they've been building up on TV, so the most recent clip we had was the post-match angle where Brody ran in following a Kamala squash, and he gave Kamala the big shot where he took the bump over the top rope to the floor. And it was good they revisited this. This is kind of a story that's gotten lost in the shuffle over the last few weeks, but it might have been a taping issue with Kamala. Because keep in mind, he was juggling world class with Mid-South by this period in 83, so maybe they just didn't have him available to shoot any angles or segments in their recent set of tapings. Then we had a Bill Ratke King Parsons match. It was there. Iceman was his usual self. Ratke was portly. Mercer was cracking lighthearted jokes about Buddy Roberts, saying, "We've seen that after Brody removed his wig, it would seem that Buddy has lost most of his hair." Most of his hair. Think he may be giving him the benefit of the doubt. Anyhow, Iceman won with the butt. I don't have anything else to really say about it. Then we had two separate interviews with Kevin Von Erich and Michael Hayes to hype up the six-man main event. Kevin talked about the trophy, says it means more to him than the World Heavyweight title because it represents family. Talks about the legacy of the trophy and that it belongs to the Von Erichs. Then Michael Hayes says that the Freebirds were the only champions that ever came over from Atlanta, and the six-man trophy means just as much to them as it does the Von Erichs. Promises that after tonight, the six-man trophy comes back home to the Freebirds. And it hit me pretty soon after this was over. I had totally forgotten who the six-man tag team champions were at this point. I remember at the end of 82 that David had won the trophy alongside Hayes and Gordy. Of course, that was before the cage match finish where the Freebirds turned heel that same night. And I don't remember what happened afterwards. If David relinquished the title because he didn't want to be involved with the Freebirds, or if the Freebirds somehow won it back between then and now. Because then I remember, too, that Hayes and Gordy just lost the American tag titles to Kerry and Brody not that long ago. And then I realized it wasn't the six-man tag titles that they lost. Well, I say it all the time with AEW and modern wrestling in general, but I will say the same thing here back from 83. There were too many goddamn belts to keep track of. So then we had a news conference with gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. And apparently, as we learn from this segment, Garvin has his own private office. Legendary. But the whole premise here is that there's a rumor going around that since Garvin is the new American heavyweight champion, that he will be defending his belt every week on television. A rather unusual circumstance. And even Jimmy Garvin says, direct quote, "I'm an unusual person, Bill Mercer." And Mercer responds back with, "Well, we know that." But he has, I don't know, I guess what you would call in sports terminology, he has a scouting report of every man on the roster. He's got the stats, if you will. Tony Khan would be peeing himself with joy over this. But the reason he called the meeting was to, well, looking back, I'm not entirely sure, other than to gloat and remind everyone of just how great he is. He talked about how he came in and beat David Von Erich in his first match in the company for the Texas Heavyweight title, which Mercer immediately retorted back with after losing it to him over a period of 5 times. And at this point, the segment was just fucking awesome because Garvin and Mercer are going back and forth with each other. Garvin's gloating about all his wins and his accomplishments, and every single time, without fail, Mercer is right there to throw in the excuses to lowball Garvin at every turn. Meanwhile, Garvin's just glossing right over it, no hesitation at all, putting himself over as the greatest thing in the world. I'm fucking dying listening to this thing. Like, this is the kind of bantering in wrestling that I love. None of this shit sounded fake or rehearsed at all. They just told these guys, go in there and bicker with one another. Garvin, put yourself over. Mercer, point out every single flaw in Garvin's BS stories. And I guarantee you they shot all of this in one take. I love this segment. I laughed the entire time. And the conclusion, as they cut back to the desk with Mercer, he is not convinced that Garvin is going to live up to his word of defending the American title every week on TV. He's under the impression that he may be ribbing. Wonder what drew him to that conclusion. Then we had a Boris Zherkov-Mike Reed match. I wrote two things down. Mercer's multiple failed attempts at pronouncing the name Zherkov, and my only recollection of Boris Zherkov is during his very short tenure in Mid-South, where they tried to make him a fake Russian and it got over like a fart in church. I expect he does not stick around with World Class that long either. And based on the subsequent promo with Skandar Akbar, it would appear that they are serving him up to Bruiser Brody next week. But that brought us to the main event, the much-anticipated six-man tag title match between the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, the match to settle the score between Decency and Filth, as Kevin mentioned in his pre-match promo. Meanwhile, the Freebirds are flying the Confederate flags in their corner. I enjoyed Buddy Roberts screaming back at the fans, saying that he's under doctor's orders to wear his protective headgear. Meanwhile, they're all chanting Bally at him for the entire match. And, well, I could go into every nook and cranny about this match if I wanted to, but the short and sweet of it is, it was a Freebirds Von Erichs match in Dallas. The people went batshit for anything and everything the Von Erichs did. The Freebirds were booed vociferously for the entire match. A lot of it was very back and forth, too. I mean, there was a little bit of heat with the Freebirds working over all three members of the Von Erichs at various points, but it wasn't an extended beatdown like you'd come to see in regular tag matches. I wrote this down because it caught my eye. Terry Gordy taking the flare bump into the corner buckle. Impressive. I always forget how fucking agile that guy was. There was also a point later on where Kevin Irish whipped Buddy into the corner post. I'm like 90% sure the ring shifted a good 2 or 3 inches. I believe Mercer called this spot by saying that Buddy was impaled in the corner. He may as well have been. But things broke down by the end, as to be expected. The Von Erichs hit Hayes with the triple drop kick at one point, and Hayes took one of the most ridiculous bumps you've ever seen for it. I can't even describe it. He didn't take a flat back bump, but he more so turned to his side, and he took a pratfall in the most comedic manner possible. But, the big angle at the end saw Kerry hoist up Hayes into a bear hug while Bronco Lubick was dealing with other shenanigans. And from behind, Buddy Roberts came in and hit Kerry in the back of the head with his helmet. And that allowed for Hayes to pin Kerry with his hand on the bottom rope. In plain view of Bronco, who counted the pin anyway. But I more so just laughed at the fact that even though Kerry was practically rendered unconscious after the helmet shot, Hayes still had to grab the bottom rope and cheat to get the pin anyway. What a fucking heel. So, yeah. The Freebirds retained, or regained, I don't know. They won the six-man trophy. I'll try and keep better track of them as champions going forward because I completely lost sight as to who the champions were prior. So, whatever. Overall, I think it's safe to assert that this is a one-match program. The main event definitely delivered, and even though I probably glossed over about 70% of the work, trust me when I tell you, it was good. I've just reviewed so many Freebirds Von Erich matches at this point, I don't want to come across like I'm just regurgitating the same stuff over and over again. The rest of the show was either package material or a story wrap-up from previous weeks, and that was all fine. The fucking Garvin segment in The Office was definitely worth going back to check out if you have some spare time. Him and Mercer had some dynamite chemistry together. But the big takeaway for next week is the build match between Bruiser Brody and Boris Zherkov. If I had to venture to guess, could be entirely wrong, but if I have followed Ken Mantell's world-class booking strategy, I would presume that Brody beats Zherkov in very convincing fashion. And they'll probably shoot an angle with him and Kamala afterwards. That's my guess. We also might see if Garvin lives up to his word of defending the American heavyweight title next week. So while we're wrapping up the show here, let me just get a few plugs out of the way real quick. Not this coming weekend, but the next 2 weekends. The Monday shows are going to be a little more jam-packed. Next Saturday and Sunday is the NWA 74 two-night pay-per-view event. And that same weekend, I promised that I would review SummerSlam 93 as part of the Retro Review series. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to recap the next episode of Raw for whatever date that would be. I guess it would be the 16th of August. And then the following weekend, I'm probably just going to skip over that Raw episode and just review SummerSlam 93 with the NWA 74 pay-per-view. You know, that'll give me plenty of time to talk about everything in detail without feeling pressed for time and trying to cram in a Raw show on top of that. And then the weekend after that, the first week of September, that is the AEW All Out weekend. And also, I believe WWE's pay-per-view over in Wales, or whatever part of the UK they're live from. I think the show's called Clash at the Castle or Hassle in the Castle, something like that. Anyway, we're going to review both of those shows as well for the following Monday podcast. So some busy stuff coming up for the next couple Monday shows, which will be good. It gives a chance to branch out and garner more attention on YouTube with any sporadic viewers. Friday show will mostly be the same going forward. Nothing will change there. I'm still contemplating on removing NWA Power from the Monday shows, depending on how the NWA pay-per-view goes down, but that'll be something I finalize after next weekend. If so, I would probably replace it with WWE SmackDown just to give it another modern product to replace it with. And, you know, with SmackDown only being 2 hours, it'll elongate the Monday show a little bit more, and it'll tie in nicely with the WWF Retro Raw reports, so we'll detail it all in the future. Until then, take care all. We'll be back this Monday for the regular WWF Raw and NWA Power reports, and I'll see you on the other side. Peace out.